The unexpected encounter. The rhythmic thud of Daniel's sneakers against the wooden floor filled the silent house. His breath came in measured bursts as he pushed through the final set of push-ups, sweat trickling down his bare back. The living room, usually a space for relaxation, had become his makeshift gym, his only escape from the restless energy that had been building inside him. The television, muted, flashed a workout routine he wasn't following anymore. His mind was elsewhere. Lately, his life felt like a script playing on loop. Wake up, work, eat alone, sleep. Sophia, his wife, was barely home these days. Late meetings, weekend networking events, business trips, it was always something. Their conversations had dwindled into brief exchanges about schedules and forgotten grocery lists. He wasn't sure when the warmth had faded, only that its absence was growing more noticeable. A sharp knock at the door cut through the quiet. Daniel froze mid-motion, his muscles tensed. He wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping sweat from his brow, he strode to the door and swung it open. Emily stood there, a bright contrast to the dull morning. The neighbor he'd exchanged friendly greetings with over the past year, always polite, always casual. She wore a fitted tank top and shorts, her auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail. A warm breeze carried the scent of jasmine from her skin. "Hey, Daniel," she said, a slight lilt in her voice. "Sorry to bother you. I need a quick favor." His gaze flickered to the light sheen of sweat on her collarbone before he caught himself. Sure. What's up?" Emily gestured toward her driveway. "I ordered this heavy storage box, and Mark's out of town again. I thought maybe you could help me move it." Daniel hesitated, suddenly aware of his state, shirtless, drenched in sweat. But she didn't seem to mind. If anything, her eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary before meeting his. "Yeah, of course. Just give me a sec." He grabbed a towel from the couch, running it over his face and neck before stepping outside. The sun was relentless, baking the pavement as they walked. Emily chatted about her latest home project, her voice light and easy, but there was an undertone to it, something unspoken beneath the surface. The box was heavier than expected. Daniel gripped the edges, feeling the strain in his forearms as he lifted. Emily bent down to adjust the position, her fingers brushing his. A spark. Brief, but undeniable. "Wow, you make that look easy," she mused, tilting her head. "I really should start working out more." Daniel exhaled a small chuckle. "You seem fine to me." The words left his mouth before he could reconsider. Emily smirked. Flattering a neighbor? Dangerous territory, Daniel. He swallowed. Was she joking? Testing the waters? He couldn't tell. And that uncertainty sent a pulse of adrenaline through him. They carried the box inside her garage, setting it against the wall. The enclosed space felt warmer, closer. Emily leaned against the workbench, crossing her arms, studying him in a way that made his pulse quicken. "Thanks for the help," she said, her voice softer now. "I owe you one." "It's nothing," Daniel replied, but the weight in the air said otherwise. A moment stretched between them. Her gaze flickered to his jawline, his collarbone, the lingering sweat on his skin. She didn't look away as quickly as she should have. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. His logical mind screamed at him to step back, to break the silence with a laugh or a meaningless comment. But he didn't move. Then, as if catching herself, Emily pushed off the workbench, brushing her hands together. "I should let you get back to your workout," she said, though her tone didn't match the casual dismissal. Daniel nodded, forcing his muscles to relax. "Yeah. No problem." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Daniel." He stopped. "Don't work too hard," she said, her smile lingering just long enough to make his chest tighten. Back inside his own house, Daniel leaned against the door, exhaling sharply. His heartbeat was steady, but something inside him had shifted. It was nothing. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Crossing the line. Daniel had always considered himself a man of restraint. He prided himself on his ability to make rational decisions, to stay within the invisible lines that kept life predictable and safe. But ever since that moment in Emily's garage, something inside him had begun to fray. Days passed, yet he couldn't shake the memory of her gaze, the almost imperceptible pause before she told him not to work too hard. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the way she had said them, the lingering playfulness, the knowing glint in her eye. It had been nothing. Or at least, that's what he kept telling himself. Sophia, as expected, had been too preoccupied to notice his preoccupation. She came home late, exhausted from meetings, scrolling through emails even as she sat beside him on the couch. Their conversations had become a series of obligatory exchanges. Did you eat? How was work? I'll probably be home late tomorrow. That night, as he lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. He turned to check it. A message from Emily. Emily, miss me? His breath hitched. He stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His mind screamed at him to ignore it, to put the phone down and roll over. But before he could stop himself, he typed a reply. Daniel, your trouble. The dots appeared instantly, a sign she was typing. Emily. And yet, you replied. A slow, guilty thrill crept up his spine. He turned the phone face down and exhaled sharply. He wouldn't entertain this. He couldn't. But the next morning, when Emily knocked on his door again, that resolve wavered. Hope I'm not interrupting, she said, holding up 2 smoothie cups. Peace offering for making you lift heavy things the other day. Daniel hesitated before stepping aside. Come in. She breezed past him, setting the drinks down on the counter. Her tank top clung to her skin, evidence that she had just finished a workout of her own. I figured you'd be exercising, she said, leaning against the counter. Thought I'd join you this time. Daniel arched an eyebrow. You want to work out? Emily grinned. Why not? You can be my coach. He hesitated. Letting her stay was a mistake. The air between them had been charged enough in brief moments. Prolonging their time together felt like fanning embers that should have been extinguished. But then she rolled her shoulders, stretching her arms above her head, and his logic caved under the weight of something darker, something irrational. All right, he said, grabbing a resistance band. Let's see what you've got. They started with simple exercises, squats, lunges, core work. Emily was playful, making exaggerated groans of protest, laughing whenever she lost balance. The sound of her laughter filled the space in a way that felt too intimate, too easy. And then, somewhere between a set of planks and a feigned complaint about sore muscles, she reached out. It was subtle at first, a lingering hand on his shoulder as she steadied herself, fingers brushing his skin. Then, bolder, a slow drag of her fingertips along his forearm as she straightened. Daniel felt the tension coil in his stomach. He should stop this. He should put distance between them. Instead, he stood still as she stepped closer. You're tense, Emily murmured, her voice lower now. You should relax more. He exhaled a shaky breath. Emily. Her eyes flickered to his lips. Tell me to leave. He swallowed hard, his pulse hammering. The space between them was non-existent now. He could smell the faint scent of vanilla on her skin, could feel the heat radiating from her body. All it would take was one step forward, one lapse in judgment. His phone buzzed on the counter, jolting him back to reality. The sound was sharp, breaking through the haze. He blinked, taking a step back. Emily held his gaze for a beat longer before exhaling a small, knowing laugh. She reached for her smoothie, taking a slow sip. Saved by the bell, she teased. Daniel forced a smile, but his hands were trembling. I should go, she said, turning toward the door. But before she stepped out, she glanced over her shoulder. I'll see you around. As the door clicked shut behind her, Daniel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His body was still taut with adrenaline, his mind tangled in the weight of what had almost happened. He had crossed a line. Maybe not physically, not yet. But in every other way that mattered, he had stepped into dangerous territory. And part of him wasn't sure if he wanted to turn back. The consequences. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, fingers drumming against the wooden surface. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the room. His mind replayed the moment, Emily's breath so close, her touch deliberate, the space between them nearly non-existent. He had pulled away, but not because he wanted to. The phone had saved him. Or had it merely delayed the inevitable? He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. This wasn't who he was. He had always been steady, controlled. He had always drawn the line between fleeting attraction and action. But now, that line was blurred beyond recognition. Across the room, his phone vibrated. He didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Emily. The past week had been a slow, dangerous game. A text here, a lingering glance there. Nothing overt, nothing he could define, but the intent was clear. He hadn't told her to stop. That, more than anything, terrified him. Sophia walked in, setting her keys on the counter. "Hey," she said, voice weary but soft. "Sorry I'm late again. Work was a nightmare." He glanced at her, guilt curdling in his stomach. "It's fine." She moved to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water. "You okay? You seem off lately." He hesitated. There was a moment, brief but real, where he considered telling her everything. Not about the texts, the charged moments, or the way Emily's presence ignited something restless inside him, but about the distance, the loneliness, the way he felt like a ghost in his own marriage. But then Sophia's phone buzzed. She checked the screen, sighed, and muttered something about an early morning meeting. Just like that, the moment passed. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'm fine." She gave him a small smile, then disappeared into the bedroom. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temples. Fine. That was the word he kept using, the lie he kept telling himself. His phone buzzed again. This time, he looked. "Emily. Can't sleep. You." His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He should ignore it. He should shut this down. Instead, he typed, "Same." The response came instantly. "Emily. Meet me? Just for a drive." His pulse quickened. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't. But 5 minutes later, he was sliding into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Emily was waiting at the corner of their street, her silhouette illuminated by the glow of a street lamp. She slipped into the passenger seat, her scent, vanilla and something warm, filling the small space. "You actually came," she murmured, a playful lilt in her voice. Daniel stared straight ahead. "This is a bad idea." Emily smirked. "Then why are you here?" He didn't have an answer. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights flickering through the windshield. It should have felt wrong, sitting there with her, the night stretching ahead like an unanswered question. But it didn't. It felt easy. Natural. "Tell me something," Emily said suddenly. "Are you happy?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He tightened his grip on the wheel. "That's complicated." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "It shouldn't be." Daniel exhaled, pressing his foot harder against the gas. "Sophia and we just feel like two people coexisting in the same space. I don't know when that happened, but it did." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "Maybe you're just scared to admit what you really want." His breath caught. He pulled into a secluded overlook, killing the engine. The city stretched below them, a sea of lights blinking against the darkness. Emily shifted in her seat, turning toward him. The air between them was thick, humming with unspoken words. She reached out, her fingers grazing his hand. "Tell me to stop," she whispered. Daniel's heart pounded. The logical part of him screamed at him to pull away, to end this before it spiraled beyond repair. But another part, the part that had been neglected, starved for something he couldn't name, wanted to stay. wanted to let this happen. The moment stretched. Then, his phone rang. The sound shattered the spell, yanking him back to reality. He jerked away, staring at the screen. Sophia. His chest tightened. He turned back to Emily, saw the flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Disappointment? Frustration? He didn't wait to find out. He answered. "Hey," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Daniel." Sophia's voice was softer than usual. I just wanted to say I love you." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He swallowed hard, gripping the phone. "I love you too." He glanced at Emily. Her expression was carefully blank now, a small knowing smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Go home, Daniel," she murmured. And for the first time in weeks, he did.